Welcome to Recap King. In this video, we will explain the death and life of Bobby Z. This movie tells the story of a D agent who asks a prisoner to impersonate a crime lord. What is the purpose behind the disguise? Let's find out in the death and life of Bobby Z. The death and life of Bobby Z begins by showing the scene off the coast of California, where an old man is seen talking about the story of Bobby Z, an immensely successful and famous marijuana trafficker. The scene then switches to show the situation in a prison where a former Marine named Tim Kearney is being held for brutal persecution and various crimes he has committed. In prison, Tim is often bullied by a gangster nicknamed Mad Dog who has many henchmen outside and inside the prison. After being bullied several times, Tim finally avenged Mad Dog's bullying by killing him using the vehicle's license plate. After committing this reckless act, Tim meets a federal agent named Tad Grussa who offers a solution for him to get out of the prison by posing as a drug lord named Bobby Z. Grussa tells Tim that he will no longer be safe in prison because of the criminals. Mad Dog's minions will kill him sooner or later. Even though Tim confidently said that he could face Mad Dog's men, he didn't waste Grussa's offer either. The scene then switches and shows a large ship sailing in the ocean, where a federal agent named Morno is being held captive by a crime lord named Don Hortero. Grussa later reveals that Don Hortero agreed to release Morno as long as he hands Bobby Z to him. But because the real Bobby Z had died while in detention, he was forced to find someone who looked like Bobby Z and could replace him. After accepting Grussa's offer, Tim's appearance was made over to be more similar to the original Bobby Z. Before carrying out the action, Tim was first shown a photo of two women named Olivia and Elizabeth who were predicted to have a close relationship with Bobby Z after all the preparations were completed. Tim was finally taken to the border of the United States and Mexico to make an exchange. He is then given the address and phone number of a man named Monk who is known to be a business partner and close friend of Bobby Z. Unexpectedly, Grussa's goal is not only to free Morno, but also to kill Tim, but Tim managed to dodge the shot. Because his shot missed and hit Don Hortero's men, Grussa and his team were involved in a shootout with Don Hortero's men. Tim finally chose to hide in the bushes, but one of Don Hortero's henchmen found out where he was hiding, then pointed a gun right at Tim and took him away from there. The next day, Tim was in a magnificent house and was treated like a guest of honor in that house. A maid then enters his room, gives him a new suit, and informs him that a party is held at the pool. After cleaning up and changing, Tim went to the pool and saw Elizabeth sitting with a boy named Kit. Shortly after, a waiter approached him and said that Brian wanted to see him. Brian is Don Hortero's trusted man who manages the crime lord's plantation business. Brian said that Don Hortero had not come to see him because he had other business. In the evening, Tim is visited by Elizabeth in his room. Tim then asked about the boy who was with Elizabeth this afternoon. She then revealed that Kit was Bobby Z's son. However, only Elizabeth and Olivia knew this fact. After spending an intimate night, Elizabeth informs Tim about Don Hortero's plot to kill Bobby Z after the exchange. However, Elizabeth did not reveal why the crime lord wanted to kill Bobby Z. The following day, Tim was planning to escape before Don Hortero arrived and killed him. When Tim is about to run away, Kit sees him and begs him to come with him. Tim, who learned from Elizabeth that Kit was often abused by Brian and Don Hortero, finally agreed to take Kit away with him. Tim and Kit eventually escape from there on a horse. However, Brian immediately noticed Tim's escape, and he ordered all his men to chase him. On the run, Tim drops Kit off in the bushes and asks the boy to hide while he fights Brian's henchmen. As a trained ex-Marine, he manages to knock down Brian's men and seize one of the motorbikes, then returns to pick up Kit and flees from there. In the middle of the trip, the motorbike they were riding ran out of fuel, so Tim and Kit were forced to continue their journey on foot. Meanwhile, Brian, knowing that Elizabeth had leaked Don Hortero's plan to Bobby Z, then punishes her by whipping her. Brian then sends his partner, Johnson, to hunt down Tim by dropping a grenade from the plane. Tim and Kit immediately seek shelter on large rocks while Johnson's men chase him on horseback. Tim manages to kill all of Johnson's men, but when he and Kit are about to escape, Johnson shoots him in the leg. Elsewhere, Brian is being tortured by Don Hortero and his henchmen because he was deemed incompetent and allowed Bobby Z to escape. Brian tries to defend himself by saying that Bobby Z ran away after Elizabeth leaked their plan. Elizabeth turned out to be a friend of Olivia, Don Hortero's favorite daughter who had died by suicide. Instead of telling Bobby the reason for revealing Don Hortero's plan to Bobby Z, Elizabeth shows her wound from Brian's lashes. Don Hortero then orders Johnson to capture Bobby Z alive. That evening, Don Hortero had not ended his torment on Brian. He now intends to punish him for whipping Elizabeth. The next day, Brian's body is found by Grussa in a garbage dump near the border. Grussa then calls Boom Boom, one of Mad Dog's accomplices, telling them about Tim's escape to Mexico. Grussa asks Boom Boom to gather all of Mad Dog's men and hunt down Tim to avenge the death of Mad Dog, who was killed by Tim some time ago. On the other hand, Tim and Kit were already at an inn to hide for a while. Tim buys an old car belonging to a woman who owns the inn, then takes Kit to buy food and supplies. After buying the needed items, Tim, who's still pretending to be Bobby Z, called Monk and asked him to prepare cash and passports. Monk then asked Bobby to come to his house tomorrow. As Tim and Kit leave in his car, Johnson, who has been tracking Tim's whereabouts, finally arrives at the inn and asks the lady who owns them about them. After getting information from the woman, Johnson entered the room where Tim and Kit were staying through the window, but he did not realize that Tim had set a trap in the room. On the other hand, it looks like Boom Boom has also been at the inn to catch Tim. Before long, Tim and Kit finally arrived at the inn after shopping. However, Tim quickly learned that someone was hiding in their room. Tim immediately stopped Kit before the boy was about to open the door fitted with a bomb. He manages to save Kit, and Johnson is eventually killed in the bomb explosion. Even though they survived the explosion, Tim and Kit didn't immediately become safe because Boom Boom shot them straight away, which was not far from there. Tim then ambushed Boom Boom and managed to knock him down and snatch his motorbike. Meanwhile, at Monk's house, Elizabeth was already there. Monk then tells Elizabeth that he got a call from Bobby Z and intends to throw a party to welcome Bobby Z home. The next day, Tim comes to Monk's house and meets Elizabeth. She then revealed to Tim that she had known that he was not Bobby Z from the start. On the other hand, Grussa and Boom Boom were seen stalking Tim from outside the house. Tim then reveals his true identity to Elizabeth. When he was about to meet Monk, Elizabeth stopped him and said that Monk already knew that he was not Bobby Z, and Elizabeth had asked Monk to help him get out of all this, where Monk was waiting at the port with the cash and passports needed by him to escape. When they were about to pick up Kit to run away together, apparently Don Huertero was there first and held Kit hostage. Don Huertero then revealed why he was so ambitious to kill Bobby Z. It turned out that some time ago, Bobby and Monk had tricked him so that he suffered a huge loss. It didn't stop there. It turned out that Bobby had hurt Olivia until she decided to commit suicide because she had been dumped by Bobby Z. Don Huertero then threatened to kill Kit and Elizabeth, but Tim threatened back that he would kill them all if he dared to hurt Kit. Unexpectedly, Kit turns out to carry out the self-defense moves that Tim had taught him. The boy distracts Don Huertero and his men so Tim and Elizabeth can break free and kill them all. Meanwhile, Grussa visits the real Bobby Z's residence, which turns out to be still alive. Apparently, the real Grussa and Bobby Z have conspired to fake Bobby Z's death and put Tim in danger by posing as Bobby Z because Bobby Z knows Don Huertero will not rest until he believes him dead. However, their plan failed because, in the end, Tim was still alive, even though their plan was to kill Tim so that Don Huertero could see with his own eyes that Bobby Z was dead. On the other hand, Tim finally arrives at the port with Kit and Elizabeth. After getting the money and the required passport, Tim asked Monk to leave. Tim, who thought it was over, threw the gun into the sea. However, not long after, Boom Boom and members of the motorcycle gang came to the harbor and intended to kill him. He immediately fled until he ended up on a bridge, where he was surrounded by Boom Boom and members of the motorcycle gang who were Mad Dog's men. Shortly after, Grussa came with the real Bobby Z. An idea crossed Tim's mind. He then twisted the facts and said that he was the real Bobby Z, while the one who came with Grussa was Tim Kearney. A fierce debate between Tim and the original Bobby Z was inevitable at the gunpoint of Mad Dog's men, until finally Kit comes and shouts to call Tim by the father's name, which makes Boom Boom and the others believe that Tim is the real Bobby Z. Boom Boom and members of the motorcycle gang then opened fire on the real Grussa and Bobby Z until they both died. Meanwhile, Tim immediately jumps on board and ends up living happily ever after with Kit and Elizabeth. The film ends.